What should I tell people?
Say,
Oh, sure. Questions. Do 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 do. Bap. Yo, maybe, maybe, no. Hey, hey, everybody. Yo, 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 yo. Uh, uh, uh. There it is. Woo. Hot. Welcome to Chadev, everybody. Welcome. Give yourself a round of applause. Go ahead. Not me, you. Thank you for coming. We're back at it. We were back last week. I wasn't here. I was away, but I'm back too. We're all back together. That's wonderful. So we, not to put undue pressure here on Alex, our dear speaker, but so we started this new program here at Chadev. It's sort of like a self-directed speaker curriculum with some points that you can get feedback from one of the Chadev volunteers. So Alex is our guinea pig. I've actually watched his talk a couple of times already. It's really great. And I think that you guys will see that. If you have an idea to give a talk and you would like to participate in this speaker curriculum, come talk to me. We'll get you in. I think we're booked up right now through June, but so that would give you plenty of time to sort of develop it and give you an opportunity to get plenty of feedback from our volunteers who are going to be helping out with that. So that's fun. That's the first thing. Second thing, I am also independently of Chadev working on bringing a tech conference here to Chattanooga called Gig City Elixir. It's focused on functional programming. It does have the word Elixir in the name, but we have folks that are from across different languages, folks like John Hughes, who's one of the designers of Haskell, and who else? Dave Thomas, pragmatic programmer, if you're familiar with that, and Pragmatic Press. So we've got some big names coming in. We're really excited for that. Tickets are on sale. It's in October. It's the last 2 days of Startup Week here in Chattanooga. That's October, I think, 26 and 7. So check that out, gigcityelixir.com. Yeah. Any community announcements anybody want to make? Any community announcements? Yeah, Adam, come on up. Round of applause for Adam, everybody, as he comes up here.
Hi, yes. So as Brett said, my name's Adam Jemerson, and so the Free Libre Open Source Software User Group, our topic from last week is actually going to be done next Thursday at 6 o'clock. We'll be meeting on the 9th floor instead of the 5th. So if you want to attend, the topic is on FreeBSD jails, a containerization system that's part of FreeBSD. We'll take a look at what it is, a little bit of how it works, compare it to the Linux container engine. If you want to join us, please RSVP at meetup.com/floss, FLOSS-cha. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. That's good. Okay, so without further ado, we've got Alex today. He's new to Chattanooga, and he works at a company called Airship, right? Yeah. And he's a developer there. And he's going to be talking to us today about, ta-da! Everybody give a round of applause to Alex.
range of clients. Nope, you guys good. And yeah, so we built a whole range of apps for different clients. I just recently moved up to Chattanooga from Birmingham. I have always just loved the city. My wife and I travel here all the time, and we just decided to move here because we can, and Airship, my company, is extremely supportive of having a remote-first company. So, so that has been a great experience so far. We've loved it. One of the benefits of working at a company like Airship is that we get to try out a lot of newer technologies and see if they're a good fit for whatever we're working on. So a common problem that we have run into over the course of being a company is creating good experiences for mobile web or mobile apps, and mainly in the cross-platform realm. So we've gone the native route where we've built an iOS app and an Android app, and with that, it has a great user experience, meaning that the interactions that the user is seeing on their phone and interacting with are native, and so they're what the user would expect from a native app. But along with that comes not so great developer experience because we're having to build two entirely separate applications without really even sharing any code between the two. So in terms of saving time, it's not a very good flow for that. So we've also gone the phone gap route, and if you're not familiar with that, it's a hybrid solution that lets you write HTML5 and use it inside of like a web view, kind of in a app shell of an app, so that in the sense you're writing with web components, web technologies, but it's inside of an app. So the benefit is you get a better developer experience. So you're writing it once, it's running in both places, but the user experience isn't quite what would be expected from a native application. So the interactions just aren't quite how a native app should feel. And so with that, we kind of kept looking to see if there was a better solution out there. And that led us to React Native. And if you aren't familiar with what React Native is, it's a mobile JavaScript framework that was developed by Facebook. It was open sourced in 2015. And it's basically a way to take the same declarative and modular style of building applications and use that for mobile development. So kind of the same base for React, but you're able to build an iOS and an Android app separately. So one distinction with this is that it's not a web view inside of an app shell. It's actually building like a real native app for iOS and Android. So it uses the same fundamental UI building blocks for iOS and Android, and you just put those together using JavaScript and React. So for example, there's like a concept of a view in React Native, and this view is actually rendering a UI view for iOS and like an Android view for Android. So it's actually rendering them on the native level. It's not rendering just a div or something like that, like other cross-platform hybrid solutions would do. So with Airship, we started using React Native in 2016, and since then we've probably shipped a number of apps to the App Store, Google Play Store over the past couple of years. So we've kind of dug in and really and figured out if it's a good solution for what we want to accomplish. And after digging in, we kind of realized the full power of the framework that it is. And we had two main observations from that. So the first thing is going to be the developer experience is going to be very familiar if you have used React on the web. So with this, our entire team essentially became mobile developers, which is a pretty big deal. In the past, we've only had maybe a handful of developers who had any mobile experience. So anytime we had a mobile project, it would be lined up for them, and no one else could really contribute to those projects. But now we have literally every developer on our team can contribute to mobile projects, and they do. So this is also a pretty big deal because when we hire new people, there's only one framework that we really need them to learn, and then they can immediately contribute to our web and mobile projects. So that's been a huge benefit. We have new developers coming in all the time. Day one, they're working in mobile, and they've never written mobile apps before, but they're able to with React Native. The next thing is that the apps just feel a lot more native than other previous cross-platform apps. So it's kind of something that just really needs to be in your hands to get the full effect of that. And most likely, you probably have interacted with React Native on your mobile device, and you probably didn't even realize it because there's a lot of large companies using React Native in production right now. So companies like Facebook, obviously, Airbnb, Instagram, Tesla, Amazon, Walmart, Microsoft. These are companies that are using React Native in production currently. And so all these companies have mobile apps, but the apps aren't necessarily 100% React Native apps. They are pieces of them are going to be React Native that are included in their existing iOS and Android apps. So the companies have apps that have been around a lot longer than React Native has been on the scene, so it wouldn't make sense to just completely scrap their old app and start new. But this kind of leads to an interesting distinction with React Native, is that you can use it within an existing native application. So a lot of people call that a brownfield application. So it kind of creates the unique ability to add the same functionality to an existing iOS and Android app, but only have to write it once in JavaScript. So our team, however, we've done a lot more with greenfield apps, meaning that we've started them from scratch in React Native, and it's only contained, we're only writing in JavaScript for the most part. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're locked into like a feature set that React Native provides. So one important piece of what React Native is that everything that's available to the native app is accessible in React Native. So React Native doesn't necessarily build an API for every native feature that's available, but they did build a way to make anything available to the JavaScript side of the app, and that's through something called a bridge. And so this bridge is built into React Native, and it facilitates the communication between the native side and the JavaScript side. So this is how the JavaScript is able to render native components, and then also how the native side can send events back to the JavaScript side over this bridge. And this bridge is also accessible when you want to write custom native code. And so if you have the ability to write some native functionality that you want in your application, you can use this bridge to communicate back and forth and access that within the JavaScript. So for example, when Face ID came out last year, we were in the middle of a project with a customer. They immediately wanted that in their application. And so with other frameworks, other cross-platform frameworks, we might have been locked into like a certain feature set, or just kind of constrained by the maintainers of that framework, so until they built that functionality. But with React Native, we had the ability to dive right into the native side and really see how we can create that. And it actually turned out that there was an open source project already that solved that within weeks of Face ID being announced. So we were able to add that into our project fairly easily. But kind of the takeaway is that there's basically no barriers between what a native app can do and what is possible in the React Native app. So if you know how to write it and add the functionality natively, you can do it within a React Native app as well. So the bridge is kind of a fairly new concept to the React world if you're coming from React on the web. However, there's a lot to compare with what you already know in React. And so a couple of the important distinctions between the two. First is going to be the setup. So obviously, you're creating two mobile applications, iOS and Android. So for iOS, we're going to need Xcode. For Android, we're going to need Android Studio. So the constraint here is that Xcode is only on Macs, so if you want to develop for iOS, you're going to need a Mac. However, if you want to develop for Android, you can be on either a Mac or Windows computer. So, but those are going to be required for that. Next up is going to be bundling your JavaScript. So React Native ships with its own bundler, so there's no need to manage anything like Webpack or something like that. So you don't have to get into the weeds with all that. It also has ES6 and some ES7 features already built in, so you don't have to deal with any sort of Babel plugins or anything. All that's just included by default. So to actually create a project and start it up, React Native has its own CLI, and it helps with a number of different tasks. So here we're creating a project. I'm calling it Chattanooga FC, and we are running it. And React Native Run iOS will open up the iOS simulator and start the application. So if you wanted to run it for Android, you would just say React Native Run Android, and it would run on the Android emulator. Or you can have a physical device plugged into your computer, and it would run on that. So it's that easy to just start up a project and get it running on your device pretty immediately. So instead of rendering HTML elements to the DOM like you do on the web, React Native is actually rendering native elements in the UI, as we talked about earlier. So to create these native elements, React Native is comprised of a set of primitive components that everything is built from. So these are essentially the building blocks of your entire application. So this is just not an exhaustive list, but these are just kind of some examples of, you can see how it relates to what you would use on the web. So we have a concept of a view. That's going to be similar to a div. We have a text component. That's going to be like a p tag, h1 tag, span, etc. Image, obviously it's going to be an image, text input. So you can kind of see the correlation between what you use on the web to what you use natively or with React Native. So there's a lot more of these primitive components that are available. These are just a few. So the one important thing to note about these is that React Native is not using web elements, and so therefore most UI libraries like you'd use on the web, for instance like Bootstraps or something like that, that would not work within React Native unless something has a React Native equivalent built into the library. Most of them don't, but there are a lot of great UI libraries for React Native that handle all that for you. So if you like kind of using something that's already pre-built, there are a lot of things that handle that, so you don't have to. All right, so for styling, there's no need for any kind of special language or syntax or anything like that for styling within your application. You really just use it with JavaScript. So all of the core components that we just looked at, they accept a property called style, and the style names and values are basically how CSS works on the web, except names are written camel case rather than using a hyphen. So for example, you can see these styles here. The style properties look the same, and the values are very similar to what you use on the web. So not all CSS properties are supported, but the majority of them are. Different components have different style properties that can be applied to them. So you can't use certain things for different components, but it's going to be very similar to how you use CSS on the web. So React Native also takes advantage of using Flexbox for layout and positioning. So if you're not familiar with Flexbox, it is a web technology that is just CSS. Within React Native, it works exactly how it works on the web. So you don't really have to learn a new pattern for layout that's only going to be specific to React Native. It's actually going to apply to the web as well. So this is the preferred way of handling layout to provide a consistent UI on different screen sizes. So Flexbox is going to be the approach that React Native recommends for doing that. So iOS and Android apps, they typically look and feel relatively different. React Native has a platform module that you can use to specify functionality and appearance for your app. So, in the code, I can check for something, for what device it is and do specific things, actions with that. So, in the component did mount, I could look for something, if it's Android, do something very Android specific, or if I want to apply a style only if it's iOS, I could check if it's iOS and do it that way. And that gives you the flexibility to have one kind of central component that you want to style a little bit differently for iOS and Android. This is a way that you can do that. With that said, React Native will absolutely work without any special attention to the platform that it's running on. Really, the decision's up to you if you want to make that a more customized experience for iOS and Android. And with that, users have some level of expectation to how they interact with their apps. And native apps kind of set the standard for how those things work and what's expected from that. React Native has a couple of ways to tie into those native interactions to make everything feel and look more native on the given platforms and interactions. So with React Native, there are no anchor tags, but anything can become clickable. So you can use a touchable component. Here are 3. There's a touchable opacity, a touchable highlight, and a touchable touchable without feedback should be that third one. These all kind of behave as their name implies. So the touchable opacity will adjust the opacity, one will highlight, one will give you any feedback at all. But these are ways you can wrap whatever you want within these tags, and it'll make anything become clickable. So here's kind of an example of using one. So I'm wrapping the text in a touchable opacity. It has a specific style, and there's also a on-press prop as well, so that you can do something when it's actually touched. So you kind of see, for example, it's touching those different components. It's giving the visual indication from the opacity that it's being pressed, and you can do some action on that whenever you want to. So React Native also comes by default with a pretty robust animated library, or it's called animated, and it provides pretty much any level of detail you might need for your animations. So it's very similar to how velocity.js works on the web. This example kind of shows how you can create an animation but be very declarative in how you're creating those animations. So for instance, this animation is kind of just a small part of this image that we're showing, but it really shows you that you can do a lot with this animated library for a pretty small amount of code, and it's very declarative in how you're doing that. React Native also provides a way to handle gestures called the pan responder module, and it's basically a way to recognize multi-touch gestures, swiping, and any other kind of touches to make the app feel a little bit more intuitive and snappy so that it'll respond to the user's movements. So I didn't include a code sample here because the API for the pan responder isn't as clean and clear as some of the other ones I was showing, but it's still an extremely powerful tool that's going to be used quite frequently within your code, whether it's using a third-party library or using it directly. But it gives you a lot of options to create that native feel, native functionality. React Native also has some pretty powerful tools built in to enhance the developer workflow. So, for instance, it has a way to have live reloading. So every time you save, it's going to update your app. And also has hot reloading so that you can save it and it'll immediately reflect without having to refresh your app and start over. The styling changes can immediately impact what you're seeing in the app. There's also some remote JS debugging, which actually uses the Chrome dev tools for debugging. So you can turn that on, and then it opens up Chrome dev tools. You can look at the console, you can look at the source you can jump to like a specific file and set breakpoints however you want. It's pretty powerful in how you want to debug your application and see how the data is flowing through your app. So there's a lot of that built in by default with React Native. So since React Native is actually just being run through a JavaScript bundle controlling your application, there's actually a few technologies in the community that enable over-the-air updates for your app. So Code Push is something developed by Microsoft that we've used before, and it allows us to update all the users' apps over the air without having to download a new version in the App Store. So if you've ever worked with mobile apps in the past, the process can be quite troublesome to actually get an update in the hands of the users. So you'll fix the bug, you'll submit to Apple for review, which could take a couple of days. Then maybe once it's actually released, then maybe it sits in your user's app store for a while before they actually update it. So if they're anything like my wife, she has probably every single app has an update that's just sitting there waiting. So it's something that you're never going to get 100% on getting your updates, getting your bug fixes, your important bug fixes in the hands of the users. So now, and how we run currently is we can fix a bug, we can make sure it works in staging, and immediately push it out to every single user's device over the air. So next time they open up the app, it's going to have that bug fixed immediately. So this is a huge win in terms of saving time for development, so we don't have to wait through that whole process, and it really keeps our customers pretty happy because we're able to immediately reflect the changes that they want without having to go through the multiple-day process of getting it approved. So lastly, I wanted to look into what the future of the React Native ecosystem might hold and kind of what's on the horizon for React Native. So when committing to a new framework, we didn't really want to spend valuable time to really learn a new technology only for it to be obsolete within a year or two. And if you've been in front-end development, web development for a while, you've probably experienced this. You've learned a new technology that has more or less immediately become irrelevant, and you have to learn something new. So one of the exciting things about React Native is that its reach is really spreading, far from just iOS and Android. So when React came out, it was pretty revolutionary in how it changed front end. When people realized that same framework could be used for mobile, React Native was born, but people have continued to push the limits of what React Native is capable of, through things like virtual reality and AR, augmented reality, creating desktop apps and Mac apps. This is all through React Native. People are creating music with React Native, Xbox One apps, Apple TV and Android TV. That actually comes by default with React Native when you start up a project. So if you run React Native init, you can immediately run it on an Apple TV, which is pretty cool. So not only is React being used in all these different mediums, but the community is also trying to figure out a way to have one centralized framework so that in theory, one project could work on web, mobile, desktop, etc. So there are many people in the React world that are sharing that same vision of using React and React Native anywhere. Microsoft, Airbnb, Twitter are all kind of leading the charge on this idea. I'm going to show a tweet by a guy named Nicholas Gallagher, and he formerly worked at Twitter, but he's the creator of React Native Web, which is actually used to create the new Twitter web app. And I think it's spot on to what React Native represents in terms of the future. So it says, React Native is a rough first draft of a framework that is not directly coupled to an individual platform's primitives. This means you can describe the majority of your application UI in a simple and expressive form that can then be rendered by a variety of backends. So backends meaning different technologies like web or mobile. I feel like we still have a long way to go before that dream is fully realized, but it's exciting to see that that's where a lot of people are headed in terms of using this one functionality, one framework anywhere. So with the possibility of using that anywhere, and the fact that a lot of these large companies are investing a lot into making sure that React is really pushing ahead and on the forefront. As a company, Airship, we really felt like it was a good decision to dive into that, and we honestly haven't really looked back since. So we've fully enjoyed it. If you have any questions about that, come talk to us. We are more than happy to kind of talk about our experience a little bit more. We have a couple of guys from Airship here that came up from Birmingham. But yeah, so thank you for letting me talk. I appreciate the opportunity.
We do have time for a couple of questions, if anybody has any.
Yeah.
All right.
I was going to just ask you, right? Oh, thanks. We've seen a lot of these sort of layer type things where you combine both the best, ideally, of both iOS and Android. And it reminds me of like a hybrid bicycle. You've seen these. They don't do either well sometimes, right? So I guess my question is, like, where do you see React Native living as far as the complexity of the mobile app that you're building? And can you give any examples of where you're like, you know what, I'd be hesitant to do something like this app, but more like this app, from what you know?
Yeah, I feel like one thing that probably isn't going to be React Native isn't going to be the best approach is mainly like gaming and just kind of really high graphic type things. And really, if the main goal of React is really to share code between the two platforms. But if you're building something that is going to be more geared towards one specific platform, then it might be better off going in that direction. But honestly, I mean, like what I was saying with kind of the native code, there's a lot of stuff that you can do natively that you can consolidate in one place. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that absolutely any single app could be a React Native app, but I do feel like that there's a lot more that React Native brings to the table in terms of allowing you to have the freedom of the native app code while still sharing some common functionality between the two. So, yeah.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
The first one is do you find that you are altering designs to accommodate the language as they come in? And the second one, which is easier, is in the Android field, is there a limit to how far back OS-wise you're going? iOS does it for you pretty much hard, but Android is.
Yeah, and I guess for the second one, I can't say off the top of my head, but there is a base version that is required. Same for iOS. But yeah, and that is something that we've only run into that a very, very small amount in terms of an Android device that just wasn't compatible. And this is something that was extremely old that this person was not willing to update their device, and so. But aside from that, we haven't really had any issues. But for the first one, I guess, are you meaning do we try to design for iOS and Android?
Up to you. So if somebody comes to you and says, I'd like to build this app, do you find you're having to occasionally go, yeah, that part maybe we have to do differently because of a restriction of the language, not so much the person just doesn't know how to design for a mobile app?
Yeah, definitely. And really, when we run into those kind of restrictions, that we usually run into those at the native level. So there are certain things that an iOS app just simply cannot do, and we've had to advise the customer that this just isn't possible with iOS, and same with Android. As far as React Native being that barrier that holds us back, we haven't had that. What we have run into is React Native doesn't have something built in, and so we've actually gone into the React Native code and made it so that we could do what we wanted to do, and then contributed that to React Native and kind of contribute to the open source there. But again, if you know what you're doing on the native level, you can do it with React Native.
Any others?
Can you explain a little bit how the live updating works? I mean, how do you push out updates without having to reinstall? What's going on in the back end?
Yeah, so there's like a JavaScript bundle that's basically running your application, and when we introduced that technology of code push as the example, it basically on the native level it tells the app to every time it opens up, check this server and see if there's a new update for this JavaScript bundle. And if there is, it's going to download that JavaScript bundle in the background so that the next time they open up the app, it's going to be the new JavaScript bundle powering that. And so, yeah, so I mean, that's kind of at the core, that's what it is. It's talking to the code push server, and if there is an update, it's going to get that. And there's a lot more complexity built in that, like, if that fails, if that new bundle isn't good and causes the app to crash, it'll roll back to the previous one, and so you don't really get stuck with an app that isn't functioning. It's going to know to go back, and it'll also prevent other people from downloading that new version. We've used something called native base. It's just something that it's a UI library that is an open source library. There's something called React Native Elements. There's a lot out there, and a lot of it's more suited for if you're looking for a specific type of design. It's more geared towards that way. I mean, there are a lot of like material design things as well. So it's just kind of there isn't like a bootstrap of React Native, but there's a lot more smaller libraries like that.
The first question sort of touched on this, but is there any security implications or performance implications for using something like this rather than native?
On the security level, I mean, I can't really speak to like the detailed level of security that you might be asking about, but like I don't think there is. I don't think there's anything that's like anything to worry about because we have these companies. I don't think Microsoft and Facebook are using this with something that's insecure. So aside from that, I'm not on that level of like security and what's actually going on. Second question, performance. So when you do have JavaScript running your application and it's communicating over this bridge, that can sometimes potentially like maybe lock up the JavaScript thread if you're doing it inefficiently. And if you've done anything with React, you kind of know that like with the whole rendering process and how the life cycle of React, you can get into holes where you're doing things unnecessarily. And in that case, like we have seen performance issues. But if we're building it in a way that is like recommended for the React workflow of like the life cycle, and we're making sure that we're not rendering unnecessarily, we haven't seen any issues. The animations, they actually run on the native level. Even if the JavaScript thread is locked, which again, it shouldn't happen, but even if it is, those animations are still going to be smooth and happening on the native level.
All right, round of applause, one last round of applause. Thanks, Alex. That's all we have for you all today, and we'll see you next week.
And we're hiring, by the way.
So it's funny that you demoed a Chattanooga FC app because it's a native React Native app for Chattanooga. Did I know that? So yeah, you should definitely, I'd definitely like to have you as part of our Are you a hooligan? Are you excited for the game this weekend? We were talking about like, what's going on today? Like, I don't know, to be determined. I don't know. What could it possibly have to do with anybody? This guy's like got a tattoo of React Native on his chest. Yeah.